This is Matt Hurt at Obsessive Viewer on Twitter.
This is Tiny at Obsessive Tiny on Twitter.
And this is ObsessiveViewer.com's The Obsessive Viewer Podcast. Welcome to The Obsessive Viewer. We're a weekly movie and TV podcast that covers a specific topic, be it genre, trope, movie, or show. Each episode, you can find back episodes at ovpodcast.com, find the blog at obsessiveviewer.com, and subscribe to the subreddit at r/obsessiveviewer. Also, you can help support the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. And if you want to support us without opening your wallet, leave us a rating and review on iTunes. We would appreciate it. And so, yeah, how's it going, Tiny?
Oh, pretty good, you know. Yeah. Pretty good in that.
Wow. I don't... Have you been watching Fargo or anything?
Yeah.
Oh, is it because of the accents?
Gotcha.
Yeah, so today on the podcast we are reviewing the Netflix docu-series that's been sweeping the kind of Twitterverse and kind of the cultural zeitgeist recently since it was released a few weeks ago. Making a Murderer. It's on Netflix. It's a 10-part documentary series. Tiny, would you say that this was the biggest thing to be released on December 18th of last year?
Sure, because Star Wars came out on the 17th, so.
Well, technically. Anyway. Joke landed. Okay. I'm kind of torn, Tiny. I don't know how you want to do this, but it's really hard to talk about this without spoiling it.
True.
So normally what we do is we will discuss something in kind of broad terms, and then we'll do a spoiler discussion, and then I'll edit that and put it at the end of the episode. But with this one, I think that we'll just have it all in the bulk of the discussion instead of editing it and putting it at the end. So we will still have a non-spoiler section, but we will also have a spoiler section immediately after that so that we can discuss it all in one spot. And I don't think that'll really be an issue because this documentary series has been kind of really huge.
It has, bigger than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, me too. And it's kind of funny. There's some interesting, not really parallels, but there's some interesting things in common, I guess, with the first season of True Detective. Somewhat to me, from at least parallels to my personal experience with going into True Detective and going into this, because this documentary series just kind of popped up out of nowhere. It
really did.
Yeah, there was it was maybe a couple, 2 or 3 months before it premiered. They had a teaser for it, and they announced the release date and everything. And then, I thought it looked intriguing. I kind of put it on our schedule of topics to for future episodes to do. And then I just kind of forgot about it. And then it was released, and everyone just flocked to it. And then, yeah. And then when season 1 of True Detective came out, it was kind of a similar thing. I saw a teaser for it, and I thought this could be pretty good. And then it was released, and it was just a sensation. So,
right.
Yeah, it's a very loose parallel there. So,
okay, yeah, I was confused for a second. I was like, really? That's kind of
right. No. So if you haven't watched Making a Murderer yet, here's your chance to hear our thoughts about it and hear us talk about what it's really about. Tiny, do you want to give kind of a plot outline? I guess a description of what it is.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a true crime docu-series, and they started filming it in 2005, I believe.
Yeah.
It took 10 years to make it.
Mm-hmm.
So
right.
It's a long time coming, really. It's about a man who was basically on trial for murder in Wisconsin, in the state of Wisconsin. And it's basically just about his trial. I mean, that's the broadest description we can give of it, but there's tons of special circumstances involved in the case, and it really sets it apart from your typical any trial, really. It's a very, very
right.
unique case for a handful of reasons. Which I won't spoil. I mean, you can be careful Googling this at all, because
absolutely.
There's so many spoilers out there on the internet. This is a trial that happened 7 or 8 years ago.
Right.
Concluded 7 or 8 years ago. So you can look up what happened before this even came out.
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful if you're trying to research it at all. If you want my advice, just go to Netflix and see their synopsis and see if you want to watch it from there.
Or just watch it, because it's really good.
That's true.
Yeah, and it's kind of it's a really unique experience watching it, because it starts out with the first episode is just all about the subject of the documentary, Stephen Avery, and it's about he had a run-in with the law in years before, and he basically was convicted for a crime he didn't commit.
Right.
And then the entire first episode is just detailing that, and then by the end of it, you think like, it kind of showed their entire hand, but the entire series is something completely different, and it's really amazing to me. It was very gripping, and yeah. So why don't we start with just talking about how we felt about it, first of all, and then we can dive into a proper discussion. Which, by the way, I'm super excited to talk to you about it, because I know that you went to school for criminal justice, so I'm sure that it'll be an interesting conversation.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
So
what was your overall thoughts on the series?
I absolutely loved it. It was so addicting. So many people are comparing it to Serial because of its true crime and its addictive nature. They aren't really that comparable of things, really. Because I mean, one's a podcast and one's video. But still, it's you have that same kind of reaction to it, because it's such a shocking story, and there's so much information involved in it.
Right.
It's a really well done documentary. I really respect so many of the decisions that the filmmakers made, and just their commitment to this. 10 years. They committed 10 years before this ever was released, and before anybody ever saw it. That's like unheard of almost.
Right.
Because you just talk about all the investment you put into this, all the time, the money, everything you put into this, you just had to put it on hold for years and years and years and years, before it's ever released and you ever get any, anything back from it. So there's so many things about this docuseries that really sets it apart. And everyone I've talked to just who's seen it was like addicted to it, and they burned through it super quick, just like I did.
So did I.
Yeah, it's addictive, and it's just a really, really compelling story. The way it's all put together. We'll discuss later all the intricacies of it, because it's really something you have to dive into to really. It's something you have to really unpack completely to really give your opinion on it and discuss it. You have to just focus on all these different parts of it. But I think just as a source of entertainment, it's phenomenal. It was so much fun to watch, and I just kind of turned it on one day, and my girlfriend happened to walk in while I was watching it, and she wasn't even going to watch it. And then she caught a couple minutes, and she was like, "So what's going on now?" And she watched all 10 episodes with me. So,
nice.
She really got into it as well. It's just a really incredible story.
Absolutely, and I echo that exactly. Like I'd heard about it. Like I knew like I said, I was aware of it and everything, and I was excited for it, but I wasn't that. I mean, December was pretty packed in terms of our scheduling for the podcast and everything too. So like I had originally intended for us to review it at the end of December, but that fell through because we had so much stuff going on with Star Wars and everything.
Right.
So it just didn't happen, and I thought that it was going to just basically be relegated to a potpourri section, and then I started seeing all of the Twitter fervor and all of the discussion being had around it, and I just immediately thought, like, I'm gonna have to watch this immediately because I don't want to get spoiled.
Yeah.
And I did, and it was just like you said, it was very gripping, and it was just really infuriating. Really is the word that I keep coming back to.
Yeah.
So much stuff happens throughout the course of these 10 episodes. And it's spectacular in the way that it's handled and presented and packaged all together. But it's also just so bingeable. And I don't like using the word like binge or anything, because I feel like that's really overused.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's the best way to describe it. It's very bingeable. They have episodes end in a way that make you just think like, I don't care about work tomorrow. I'm going to watch the next episode.
Yeah.
It's just spectacularly well constructed, and the content is just amazing. Like, we'll get into. Okay, so yeah, that's basically my overall thoughts on it, or my broad strokes thoughts on it. Before we get into the actual meat of it and the spoiler discussion of it, how did you feel about the style of it, like the filmmaking and how the footage was edited all together, and how the information was divulged to us, and just basically its overall presentation?
I was really impressed with the direction they took because, first of all, we're incredibly lucky that the state of Wisconsin allows cameras in their courtrooms,
right?
Because there almost wouldn't be a documentary without it,
right?
I mean, it'd be pretty much impossible. But I really appreciated the dedication to kind of letting that footage speak for itself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there probably 70% to 75% of this documentary is just footage from inside a courtroom.
Yeah.
Which can be so boring. I mean,
absolutely.
It's people talking. It drags on forever. There's so many people who are just there to just make sure things don't get out of hand, and it can just be. There's all this legal speak. It's very plain. There's very few adjectives used in a courtroom. It's all very plain speak. It can be theatrical, obviously, but they did a good job of including all of that footage because it's so pertinent and it matters so much, but it wasn't just a droll on and just a dragged out boring trial.
Right.
They interspersed things where they needed to explain things, and it was very well constructed. And there's some choices they made. For example, people, like I said, people keep comparing this to Serial, and one of the biggest differences between this and Serial is that with Serial, the host has placed herself into the investigation.
Right.
And so we're seeing everything, we're being led through everything from her perspective. Now, this documentary, Making a Murderer, is also through the perspective of the filmmakers, but I really respected their decision not to insert themselves into it.
Right.
And sort of, we didn't really need a guide per se through this. We did, because you don't need any narration or anything like that. So, there's plenty of documentaries where filmmakers do that.
Right.
Gasland was a really popular documentary where he was right in the middle of it. That's what Michael Moore does in every single one of his documentaries. He kind of hosts it or guides you through it. I don't think this needed that, and I think the filmmakers picked up on that really quickly. And I think that's a great decision. It's a very selfless decision.
Totally.
Because I think it's kind of natural to insert yourself into a story when the onus for the story's credibility is on you. I understand why people do that.
Right.
I think that was a great decision for this.
Yeah, me too. It was just the way that this is one thing that just absolutely doesn't really perplex me or confuse me or anything, but it makes me so it boggles my mind to try to wrap my head around how a documentarian or filmmakers can take footage of so much stuff and then compile it into just a narrative that's as smooth and gripping as this. A good example of that is at Heartland Film Festival. I saw a movie called The Big Lonely that was just the filmmakers gave a guy who lives in the woods 2 cameras, and he shot for 11 months just alone, and gave them hundreds of hours of footage, and then they cut together a narrative from that, and it was an incredible movie. And it's a similar situation with this on a bigger scale, actually, because they had 10 years worth of footage,
right?
Or 10 years worth of story with I can't imagine how much footage they had. And it's worth noting, like the courtroom scenes, like a big portion of this documentary is the courtroom, the trial, and obviously they cut out a lot of stuff from it because it was a 6-week trial, but I feel it felt so seamless to me, and it was just at times I was watching and I was so gripped by it, thinking that thinking that it wasn't possible that they could make something so non-scripted or so unscripted feel so narratively driven, basically. And that's kind of one of the. It's worth pointing out that the defense attorneys, like they became kind of the heroes of the documentary.
Yeah, they did.
In the aftermath, and totally deserved, because they were incredible, and their presence in the courtroom was just astounding, and I really loved the way that they argued their case. And yeah, it was I just loved seeing how they packaged all the information and just gave it to us, and it was such a consumable narrative, basically. It was just
packaged really well.
Yeah. So why don't we stop kind of beating around the bush and just get into the actual specifics of it?
Yeah. So
okay, I'll probably cut and put a spoiler warning here, but if you haven't watched Making a Murderer yet, I please do, and then come back and listen to us discuss it. If you haven't watched it yet, then go to the show notes and then check the timestamps to skip to our potpourri section. So, having said that, we are going to get into spoilers right now. So, Tiny.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, let's just go through the kind of the timeline, basically.
Bruce Willis was dead the whole time.
Jeez.
Stupid.
Yeah. No, but, so it starts out, I mentioned it in the broad stroke section, that it starts out with Stephen Avery getting, arrested and then spending 18 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that if I had a problem with it, it felt like all of that was very quick. And they gave us all the information extraordinarily quickly in that first episode there for that backstory, which, I mean, it makes sense because it's kind of just, it's not an integral part to the story overall, but, I felt like they kind of brushed over the incident where he runs his cousin off the road. If you remember that.
Yeah.
That was kind of, it kind of set it up to where, or kind of seemed to set it up to where they were implying that the sheriff's office or the sheriff's department had a grudge against him for doing that to his cousin after some kind of altercation, because his cousin or whoever it was involved with a deputy or something like that. Do you remember that?
Was she married to a deputy?
I couldn't remember if she was married or just involved with. I want to say she was married.
Okay, yeah, I think so too.
Yeah,
yeah, and you know, you're right that was. I don't know if I'd say it was brushed over, but I would say it was massaged to fit the narrative that they wanted to establish.
Right.
It was in a way they're obviously this is a true story, so there's no characters, but if this were fiction, that would be their way of establishing the character of Stephen Avery.
True.
And it's no mystery. You know, the opinions of the filmmakers is no mystery. They think that the man is innocent, at least to the point that they think he deserves a new trial, or he should be his evidence needs to be looked at again. At the very least, that's what they think. So they're sympathetic towards Stephen Avery as filmmakers,
right?
And they want to present him as a sympathetic character. And I think that event was presented in a way that painted him in a sympathetic light.
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah. And it was a very good way to establish the character of Stephen Avery, if I can say that. But
yeah.
And we'll talk a little bit about how some of the articles have come out that talks about how some of the stuff was omitted from it later. But
right.
We'll come back to that. But at the center of this documentary series are two trials, really. There's Stephen Avery's trial, and then the trial of Brendan Dassey, who is his nephew, right? And who was like, it's so crazy to me that the thesis statement of this whole documentary series is basically how people can slip through the cracks of the and be served up by the justice system, basically, and just be just devoured by it,
right?
Unfairly so. So, and it's before we get to the actual trials, we should talk about the actual crime.
Right.
I just kind of realized that. So in was it 2005 or 2003? No, it was like
2005.
2005.
Yeah.
In 2005, a photographer for Auto Trader was found. She went missing and then was eventually found. Well, not even her body was found. Just pieces of her bones were found.
Mm-hmm.
And it seemed from the narrative that the documentary series was establishing, it seemed very clear that the sheriff's department planted evidence on his property to ensure that they got a conviction from that. And that's what basically the entire documentary series is centered around. So first of all, did you know anything about the case before you started it?
I knew absolutely nothing about this.
Same here.
Nothing whatsoever.
I was actually kind of miffed, I guess, because I watched the trailer for it on Netflix about a week or two before it premiered, and I watched it and I was like, they're giving away a lot of stuff in this preview, not realizing that most of the stuff is this trial and everything. And they were talking about the sexual assault that he was in prison for.
Okay.
But it was just the story is just so dense with stuff to unpack that it's just jarring to me, really.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know anything going into it either, and as Stephen's trial kind of started to unfold, and granted throughout it it bounces back and forth between Brendan's story and Stephen, so we'll just focus on Stephen's trial for now.
Mm-hmm.
How did you feel the depiction of the trial was, and how did you feel about the case overall as presented by the documentary series?
At first I was kind of reacted the same way you did. I was just really angry throughout it.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, this is just ridiculous. I can't believe this is happening. But then after, I think maybe the 5th or 6th episode, I was like, you know what? This is all being presented from, this is a biased presentation of this information.
Right.
You know, I mean, like we found out after I'd found out after, I watched it all, did some research online.
Mm-hmm.
There's tons of evidence and other kinds of stories, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it unsubstantiated, I think, but all kinds of stories and evidence.
And character stories against Stephen Avery, too.
Yeah, stuff that was not presented in this documentary.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about a 6-week trial. It's literally impossible to put all that into a documentary unless you want it to be like 30 or 40 hours long.
Right.
So I understand there has to be editing, but
Mm-hmm.
when you're talking about something as delicate as adjudicating a case against a person, you have to have every single detail that exists in order to have an informed opinion.
Right.
And it has to be presented objectively. And we don't get that in this documentary. So after 5 or 6 episodes, I was like, all right, I need to sit back and really, really try to be an objective viewer, because this documentary is not an objective documentary.
Right.
And so that's kind of how I evolved as a viewer of it, I guess. I don't know. I want to be very critical of it, but at the same time, I think these filmmakers did a pretty good job, and they kind of did what they could.
Right.
I think they could have been more objective, but that's just me.
Right. And that's kind of the burden of the documentary format too.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's like, I don't think that there's a problem with presenting a somewhat biased thing. I don't think that it's inherent to the documentary format. Maybe it's a little bit inherent to the true crime documentary format, but I don't think it's inherent to documentaries itself to present an unbiased thing. I mean, they definitely had a story that they carved out of this greater story of, I would argue, potential tragedy. Well, obviously it's a tragedy if a woman ended up dead, but she's not the focal point of the thing. I'm putting my foot in my mouth, but but they don't they presented it the way that they wanted to present it, and I think that it worked extraordinarily effectively. Not so much to convince the viewer to sympathize with Stephen himself or with Brendan or with this particular subject, but on the greater scale, it presented a clear thesis about how there's systemic issues within the criminal justice system and how people can be just completely ripped apart and their families entirely just, destroyed by basically something that could potentially be completely unfounded.
I think that's the more important point that you touched on, is that, so many people are focusing on, did he do it or didn't he do it? Everyone has an opinion. I have an opinion. Mm-hmm. And that's really interesting to discuss. I've enjoyed that with the people who've watched it. But I think the bigger point with this is that our justice system is tragically flawed.
Yeah.
And that is demonstrated very well in this documentary. Mm-hmm. We'll get to the points later, but there's just so many things that could have gone different ways in this trial. Mm-hmm. And I think so many different people made so many different mistakes and just tainted this entire case to a really disappointing and tragic level. I mean, just really, you want to have faith in the concept of justice.
Right.
You really want to. I do. I want to feel that when someone goes to jail for the rest of their life, they should be there.
Right.
And when someone gets acquitted, on the other side of that, they should be free and get to live out the rest of their life with their family and loved ones and have their freedom
without judgment. Also,
without judgment, yeah. And that's not something we get with our legal system. We kind of pretend that it does, but it really doesn't. And I think that's exemplified to a very unfortunate degree in this documentary. So I think that's the bigger point that I think people should focus on, is that the justice system is screwed, and it's kind of scary when you think about it.
Absolutely. And scary is the perfect word to describe it. Like throughout, and there are a lot of, I definitely drew parallels between this and Serial last year.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
Which I'm kind of glad that this is here for us to watch and everything and kind of chew on, because I haven't listened to season 2 of Serial yet, as it's airing, and I'm just not that intrigued by it yet. But anyway, but this whole experience reminded me of my experience with Serial, in that at the end of that first season of Serial, I was just like, okay, I don't know if he did it or not, but it's very clear that he didn't deserve, they didn't meet the burden of proof, or he didn't have a fair trial. And I felt the same way coming away from Making a Murderer. But this time around, I just kind of got such an intense feeling of dread. Not so much for the people in the documentary, except for Brendan. We'll get to that. But, I felt just an incredible amount of dread, in that for one of the first times ever, I thought, if I was in that position, if I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, or someone said the wrong thing and the wrong person became convinced that I did something that I didn't, like, just how the emotional toll that kind of situation would take, in which you are fighting against people who are convinced that you are something that you know in your soul that you're not.
Right.
It's absolutely terrifying to me.
It really is.
And it's something that was communicated very well in this documentary series.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but before we get to the actual trials and everything, we're kind of all over the place, but I think this is a good opportunity to talk about the media.
Yeah.
Which, in terms of Brendan, who in the documentary series was, like, very clearly coerced into confessing.
Yeah.
I was so angry at that, because I don't understand how it's possible that confession or anything was even admissible. Like, I don't see how he could possibly have been charged with that.
Yeah.
Just because so many things. And he's a minor. There was no legal guardian present. There was no.
Yeah.
He's clearly not mentally capable of giving a statement like that. And it's just how that situation literally ruined his entire life is just heartbreaking and infuriating and terrifying all the same. Yeah, and one thing about that just immediately just angered me beyond belief, and the thing that you could argue definitely helped solidify Brendan's fate in this documentary series is how the media just ran with it.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, printing the details of the statement, of the confession, and using it for headlines about the grisly murder of the woman, and how there was one moment, I can't remember if it was when Brendan's whole thing happened, or if it was regarding Stephen, but there was a moment that they didn't really follow through on it, or they didn't really leave this as a far-reaching arc, I guess, for the documentary series. But there was one moment where a producer for Dateline is on screen, and she has this for lack of a better term, she has this eating grin on her face, and says that murder is so hot right now, and we need to make sure that we get it before another network scoops it or whatever.
Right.
And that was just so absolutely infuriating to me, and like that made my blood boil, because these are people's lives.
Yeah. That's another really strong indictment of this documentary is, before this, I knew that the media is not interested in the truth. The media is interested in what sells papers and what gets people to watch their programs at night. That's what the media is interested in.
Absolutely.
And people confuse that as well. That's something, people sit there and watch the news or read the paper, and they think this is the truth. This is what happened in this situation because it's in the paper. We trust that, but it's really, that's not what the media is about anymore.
Right.
You can argue it never was. I think there was more integrity in the past, but anymore it's exactly what that lady said. Murder's hot right now. It's about what people will look at. It's not about what's true. And that was demonstrated time and again in this documentary as well. There was a part where there's a part where something is decided in the court, and you see this camera that's outside the courtroom, and you see these reporters just literally running, sprinting out to get to their camera and get their mic on and get their makeup all done and be perfect. And the reason is because if you're the first one there, you have a claim to that information.
Right.
That's how the media works. It's kind of like trademark kind of stuff. I'm not sure of the ins and outs of it, but if you're the first news source to have a piece of information, all other news sources have to cite you after that. So being first is huge. It doesn't necessarily matter if the information is true.
Right.
It's just about the fact that you said it first. And, if you're wrong, you can just kind of go back later and be like, oh, well, we actually were misinformed here, and this is what actually happened. It's a really tragic state of events that's what people follow. People look to that for the truth, and that's not what they're interested in at all.
Absolutely. And it's funny that we're talking about this right after doing our year in review episode, in which we both had Spotlight as our number one movie, which was a film that in part celebrated journalistic integrity.
Right.
And this is a stark contrast to that. And I may have misspoke earlier because because they did kind of follow through with the indictment of the media presence in the trial and everything throughout. And like the thing that really stuck with me was, I believe it was after Brendan's sentence or his verdict was read, when the cameras were just swarming the mother and following her out, and like she just flipped out and screamed at them.
Yeah.
Like it was so raw that I had to rewind it and put subtitles on because I couldn't understand what she was saying.
Yeah.
And that was just, that was just heartbreaking.
It really was.
Yeah. So what did you think of we talked about how the trials were presented, and like the way I can't get over how amazingly well this was edited all together. And they made what is like a boring part of our justice system into appointment viewing. And I mean, granted, they cut out a lot of stuff and they all that, but it was just so gripping to me how they handled the footage and everything. And it's funny that you said that we were so happy that the state of Wisconsin allows cameras in the courtrooms. And like I immediately wanted to say, like, I think that's the only thing that we're gonna thank the state of Wisconsin for.
That's true, yeah.
Because it does not paint a favorable picture to them, or particularly the Manitowoc County sheriffs.
Yes. And the Calumet County prosecutors.
Yeah.
So I mean, the trial was really presented well because it felt like you're getting this cast of characters that are going up against one another, and again, they're real people, they're not characters, but if you will, the leads were the two defense attorneys, Dean Strang and Jerry Buting, who were hired by Stephen Avery. Stephen Avery got a settlement from from Manitowoc County. Actually, it wasn't the state.
Oh, okay.
It was the county, wasn't it?
Right, I think so.
Because that was part of the big deal, was that he thought he was suing the county for like $36 million. Now, for the state of Wisconsin, for the federal government, $36 million, it's not good, but they can eat that no problem.
Right.
Manitowoc County, that's a lot of money.
Right.
That's a ton of money. And so he thinks, one of the theories, I think maybe Stephen Avery's part of his theory, is that they framed him for this murder because they didn't want to pay $36 million to the guy.
Right.
And he ended up settling for, I think, $400,000.
Okay.
And he unfortunately, I think part of the reason he settled for that is because he needed money to get lawyers for this new trial he was a part of.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was kind of a blessing, if you will, that he was able to get that money, because I assume Dean Strang and Jerry Buting are some high-level lawyers, and they probably cost tens of thousands of dollars.
Right.
I mean, people also don't realize how expensive it is to be arrested and be prosecuted for something. Going to trial is just so much money.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that really struck me and terrified me too, is that, like, there's a moment where Stephen Avery says, I think it's kind of in the early episodes of the documentary, that he says that something to the effect of poor people never win.
Yeah.
Or poor people can never win. And that's such a tragic piece, a tragic thesis statement for the series as well.
Yeah.
And for our society, really, because, we're, as citizens of the United States, if we're charged with a crime, we're like, the country is duty bound to give us our day in court. Like, that's a big part of our justice system. And it's like, if we can't afford to properly defend ourselves, we'll lose our lives.
Yeah. But it's become unsustainable at the point we are now, because you can be some guy who works at McDonald's and you get charged with a crime. It's way easier for you to go to court for one day and take a plea deal and get on probation than it is to hire a lawyer, spend $10,000 on a lawyer, miss 3 weeks of work, and not be able to pay your bills and go bankrupt. It's much easier to just take that plea bargain because you got to get back to work to feed your kids.
Right.
And that's what he's referring to when he says it's hard to win if you're poor.
Right.
That's what he means.
Yeah.
That's something that I had one of my professors when I was in college for criminal justice. He told a story about just like that.
Wow.
He was a father who worked fast food, and he just took a plea bargain because he had to get back to work.
Jeez.
His kids had to eat. He was like, I didn't do that. I was like, but I said I did because I had to get back to work. I couldn't go to court every day for 3 weeks.
Jeez.
So that's a thing that happens,
Yeah.
Kind of got off track there.
Right.
So the kind of the good guys, if you will, or the protagonists,
right,
in respect to this documentary, are Dean Strang and Jerry Buting. They're the defense attorneys for Stephen Avery.
Right.
On the other side of the aisle, you have the prosecutors, and I want to say, because they moved the trial to Calumet County, which is a neighbor of Manitowoc County.
Yeah.
In the pursuit of a fair trial,
right,
which is kind of a joke anymore.
It is, and especially in this case, because it got coverage in the media.
Yeah.
So, like, they couldn't go. I think they chose to go there, to Calumet County just because they knew that they couldn't go. There was no way to go somewhere that would actually be fair. Like, they didn't have, like,
right.
It was so widespread and so covered.
In the modern age, the modern information age, you'd have to go to another state.
Right.
I mean, and that's you just can't do that. That's not, you can't do that anymore. If you're being prosecuted by the state, you can't go to another state to have your trial. Mm-hmm. So that's a very unfair advantage that the state has, is that you have the media against you, and it's hard to get a fair trial, basically.
Right.
If it's a big profile thing like this. So I believe the prosecutors were actually from Calumet County and not Manitowoc, where the crime actually took place. I might be wrong.
Okay.
I think they're from Calumet. I think they were special prosecutors from Calumet County. The most featured one, I think the lead prosecutor was Ken Kratz. Get your bleep button ready, because from the get-go, like, I think that within the first 10 or 15 minutes of him being on the screen, I looked over to my girlfriend. I said, "This guy is a smug That's what I kept saying, that phrase. I hated this guy so much.
Me too.
And, I think part of that is bias in the documentary. That's part of it. But so much more of it is the fact that this guy is a smug a-hole.
Right.
He really is. He just has that demeanor about him. He's just one of those people who enjoys being on the prosecutorial side of the law.
Right. Not for justice or anything,
right,
but for competing and winning, and
he enjoys pointing his finger.
Right.
And that's what he enjoys doing. And you could tell that throughout this entire trial. He just had this attitude of, I'm right. We all know this guy's guilty. Let's get on with it. Stop with your crackpot theories about, corruption and planting evidence. That's ridiculous. I'm right. You're wrong. Let's get on with this.
Right.
That's kind of the smug attitude he had throughout this entire trial. And I could not stand the guy.
Me neither.
But I will say, I think he's a pretty good prosecutor.
Yeah. I think part of that is that I feel like maybe in that line of work and the less ethical people that are in that line of work, I guess, they would need to have that kind of presence, I guess.
You do. It's an unfortunate necessity. You have to have the right attitude for the case.
Right.
You have to approach everything differently. And I think he knew that he needed to present this confidence in order to, never leave any line of, any kind of points that he would make. Never abandon it. Stick to your guns. Be confident and smug, and project the aura of correctness or morality or ethics or whatever. Just project that, and a trial at the end of the day is convincing 12 people of one thing. That's what a trial is. And he knows that if he projects the right attitude and the right points and sticks to his guns, that's going to have a major influence on human beings, which is really what's happening in a trial. So I think he's very good in that respect. But he was definitely very antagonistic. He was the bad guy, if you will.
Yeah. And when at the end, when they revealed, toward the end, when they were catching up with what all was going on each year, and they showed that he had what's the word I'm looking for?
Scandal.
He had that scandal, where he basically was texting an abuse victim that he was in working with, basically, and just basically like propositioning her and really being just a prick.
Yeah, really.
Like that seemed like that. It felt to me like it just made me feel not happy, but it made me feel like I'm relieved that he got that he was found out for something, because he didn't seem like a genuine person. He didn't seem like a good person.
Very true.
And yeah,
I agree. So it was very, very compelling to watch these two groups go up against one another. There was another special prosecutor. I don't remember his name.
For Stephen's case, or are you talking
for Stephen's case?
Okay.
There was another.
I can't remember.
I don't remember his name. He was. I think he was more of a forensic guy. He was like a backup, I think. But I remember him. He made a lot of comments to the media after the day's proceedings and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
He was the one who kept saying, he's like, all this business of police planning evidence, it's just nonsense.
That's
it's just
right.
not true. I don't remember his name.
Was he the one that was? He wasn't the one that was the investigator that. No. I'm thinking of Brendan's case. Never mind.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know what you mean though.
I can't think of his name. He was the less compelling character, if you will. I don't remember him.
Right.
Much, but so it was really compelling, and it was theatrical to watch these two groups go head to head and examine a witness and then cross-examine.
Right.
The state calls their witnesses first, and then the defense cross-examines, and then you go over to the defense and they call their witnesses and the state cross-examines. It's just such a it's like watching a play. It's like watching a stage
play. It really
play.
is.
And these were some theatrical guys. And I give all three of them a ton of credit for doing a good job. But I give the two defense attorneys, Dean Strang and Jerry Buting, mountains of credit for their integrity.
Right.
I don't think Ken Kratz had a ton of integrity,
No.
obviously. So that's why those two kind of ended up being the heroes of this, if you will, because those guys did a remarkable job.
Yeah. What did you think about the actual case itself, in terms of just the, just what we saw in the documentary series? So don't incorporate stuff that you read afterwards. But
okay,
how did you feel about the presentation of it? Because I'll go ahead and just say some of my thoughts on it.
I've been rambling. Please go ahead.
Oh no, you're fine. So basically, the way that it was presented to us, it seemed just kind of completely convincing that that the key was planted there, and that the blood. I was so shocked when they opened the evidence and saw the vial that had been tampered with.
Yeah.
And I was just gobsmacked by that. I could not believe it. And I wish that it was, like so much else with this, I wish that this was a huger thing. It's a very theatrical presentation, but it's also in real life. So it's not like they end the episode with this vial that has a hole in it, and saying that it's very possible that they took blood out to plant it on there. And when you separate it into, if you think of it in terms of a fictional TV show, a serialized television show that's fiction, that's the arc of the next episode would be them going after it, and there would be big dramatic moments where it all comes to light and everything. But the tragedy of making a murderer is that this is real life, and real life isn't as theatrical as that. And it was just so, it played with my sensibilities as a viewer, really. And I like that. So we had that, and then the key, which I mentioned, and then the complete lack of, or the
3 words: conflict of interest.
That too.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It just seemed really obvious to me that he was set up for it. That this was all orchestrated by forces that are stronger than him to get him sent away. And throughout the course of the documentary series, it kind of becomes a big part of it becomes that the theory is that they set him up not because they wanted him to send him away specifically, but because they were so sure that they just wanted to make sure that they got a conviction out of it and all that.
Oh, okay.
That seemed at least a small part of it. Here and there. And it's just, I just came away from it feeling like this is very obviously the way that it happened. Obviously, there's more information to be gleaned from it that didn't make it into the documentary series. But what was your gut reaction after seeing it?
It is, without a doubt, this was a remarkably shoddy investigation. Both sheriff's departments that were involved in this were definitely culpable in this case. They should have faced numerous consequences for their actions, which I don't think they did, unfortunately. Most of the responsibility lies on the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, because the crime took place in Manitowoc County. But they, as law enforcement officers, as in a respect legal professionals, they should understand the concept of a conflict of interest, which is a big deal. That is a huge deal in legal proceedings, in anything really. So I understand that initially, this is a crime that took place in their jurisdiction. They had to be first on the scene. But within 24 hours, they should have been on the phone to the State Department of Justice, the Federal Department of Justice, the FBI, neighboring county sheriff's departments, saying, hey, we can't have our hands on this because we have a huge conflict of interest. They did not do that. Eventually, the Calumet County, which is the neighboring county, they took over primary investigation. Then I think the FBI did. Or no, I'm sorry. Then the Wisconsin Department of Justice, Wisconsin State Department of Justice took over. But that took days and days, and even into, I think, months after this crime was committed, there were Manitowoc County sheriff's deputies searching for evidence.
Yeah.
In this crime scene
and finding evidence. Yeah, and that's just it. Oh,
that is absolutely inexcusable.
Right.
There's a point I wanted to bring up here. There's some what's called case-made law, which is where a case goes to trial, it concludes, and there's a law that's created as a result of that finding.
It sets a precedent.
A legal precedent. Yeah. It's called case-made law. There's a case-made law called the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine. What it means is if the analogy is if a tree is poisonous, you would not eat the fruit from it. Therefore, you have to throw out the entire tree. That plays a role on how evidence works in our legal system. Whereas if you find out that one piece of evidence was planted, or if you find out that this one thing is untrue from the investigation, you get a mistrial, you throw it out, you got to reinvestigate it. You need to do it. It just throws everything off, and you can't get around that. That's something that's part of the legal system. Cases and trials get thrown out for someone not logging something into evidence in an hour. Like I remember when I spent time with a lot of cops when I was getting my degree, there were times where they needed to, they got a bunch of crap during the trial because it took them 3 hours to log a piece of evidence into the evidence locker.
Wow.
Instead of 20 minutes. And that almost got the whole trial thrown out and the criminal back on the streets because they didn't log something into evidence quick enough. Which is nothing compared to what happened in this trial.
Right.
I mean, it is, you have to talk about what is a fact and what is an assumption and what is just a theory. It is a fact that someone tampered with that blood of vial.
Yeah.
Without question, that happened. It is a fact that these sheriff's deputies basically, they didn't set Stephen Avery up, I don't think, but they wrongfully convicted him of a previous crime and basically don't like the guy.
Right.
I mean, there's just so many conflicts of interest and just so many facts that stack against the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department that they should not have been involved in this case any more than they needed to be, but they absolutely were. Right. And this investigation was just so poorly done. There's just dozens of things you can point to that are so damning. I think this trial, in my opinion, and again, I'm not a professional or anything, it's just my opinion, this should have been a mistrial within the first week.
Right.
The judge should have thrown it out.
Do you think that the level to which the investigation was so poorly handled and everything, how much of that do you think, judging from what was presented to us in the documentary, how much of that do you think was corruption? How much of that do you think was incompetence? Shortcuts taken? How much of that? It seems like to me it was more of a mixture of all of it. There was definitely a bias, an assumption that Stephen Avery did it. If there was a malicious intent to intentionally frame him for it without thinking that he, as a vindictive measure for that, I don't know if that would be the most the biggest aspect of it, or if it was just general incompetence and yeah. What do you think?
I really think it's a mixture of all. I think, like you said, incompetence, laziness, corruption. I think it's a blend of all of those. I think the judge, I don't remember his name. Harris may have been his last name.
I don't remember.
I think he was kind of lazy. I think he should have recognized from the get-go that this should be a mistrial. I think even when one of the respective attorneys would object to something, would levy an actual objection, the judge just did not react very enthusiastically. He didn't. I understand you have good days and bad days, but you just can't have many bad days when you're dealing with people's lives like this.
Right.
You have to be alert and you have to be on your game when you're at work. And there were times where one of these lawyers would object, and the judge would be like, well, you know, I think I'm going to uphold that objection. And it's like, what? Be decisive. You're a frickin' judge, dude.
Right.
I mean, that was really frustrating to me. He seemed like a very hands-off kind of judge, and that's not. I mean, there's different styles. I understand that, but this is justice is supposed to be cut and dry. And again, something this documentary demonstrated is that it's not. It's so biased. You're dealing with people, and people have personalities, and I don't think this judge had a very good personality for a judge for a case like this. I think the cops. Gosh, I'm trying to think of the investigators' names. Fossbender.
Right.
And the other one, I don't recall his name.
I don't remember his name.
He had it like Whitmer or something like that as a W something.
Yeah, something with a W.
Something with a W. Yeah. I think they were somewhat incompetent in the fact that they did not recognize the personality and mental deficiencies of Brendan Dassey. Right. Which is evidence that was they tried to infuse it into Stephen Avery's trial, and it they ended up abandoning it because it was so unreliable. Right. But just the fact that they pursued so many things where they should have recognized that this is not going to hold up very well in court. Right. They put so much emphasis on those interviews and confessions with Brendan Dassey without the thought that it was going to be pretty unreliable. Right. And you know, they pursued so many different, or they pursued a certain line of events happening and ended up throwing it out. Just you know, Brendan Dassey said that he and his uncle basically raped this woman on a bed, and Brendan Dassey stabbed her,
slit her throat,
and drug her out. Literally not one single shred of physical evidence suggested that at all. Nothing at all. And they searched for evidence in Stephen Avery's room like 5 or 6 or 7 times. Right. They would have found some kind of physical evidence. Yeah. There was nothing. Oh yeah. And they pursued that line of reasoning for a long time, and eventually just had to throw it out because it was ridiculous. Yeah. But once you do it, the damage is done. I mean, you can always have something stricken from the record, but once you plant that seed in someone's mind, it's there. That's kind of a trick you can kind of use as an attorney, and it's unfortunate, but like I said, you're dealing with human beings, and we're flawed, and we have biases and preferences, and it's just such a delicate thing to weave a story together, or a path to acquittal or conviction. So I mean, they didn't choose their direction very well. I'll put it that way, and they just made so many mistakes throughout it. It's just really shocking, I think. Right. And to your point about planting a seed, an idea is, to quote Inception, is the most resilient parasite. Yes, yeah. And it's impossible to kill an idea. Yeah, and so let's talk a little bit about the kind of afterwards, like what evidence wasn't in the actual documentary. There was some stuff that came out that, and we don't need to really dwell on this all that much, but there was one thing that struck me that it didn't really even connect with me while I was watching it that much as a big focal point, but the fact that both
Stephen and Brendan were charged, and the theory that the state put against them in each trial were inconsistent with each other.
Yep.
Like they're charged with the same crime in both, like they don't match up. And
right. It's amazing.
It's incredible and so frustrating. And I watched a Q&A with Dean Strang that was on YouTube that I'll link to in the show notes. It's like about 15 minutes long, and then there's an extra like 15 minutes where he's on a TV show on the news somewhere. And so one of the questions was that question of why both of the people were charged when the theories were so inconsistent. And it was just like Dean Strang just said that he's seen it before. It's a sad reality of the system that happens, and it didn't seem like it was something that really shocked him. And it was ugh.
Yeah, in the Stephen Avery trial, she was killed in the garage. But they never alluded to Teresa Halbach being raped and mutilated to a certain extent in the bedroom.
Right.
They that wasn't part of their theory. But in the Brendan Dassey one, he stabbed her and he raped her and all this stuff, and it's like you literally have two different stories.
Yeah.
And this is a spoiler section. Both men were convicted on two different stories.
Yeah,
who committed the same crime supposedly.
It's infuriating.
It's just remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, even if they both did it and they were both guilty of it and everything, the fact that it's possible for them to both be convicted when the prosecution puts out a theory that is incongruous with the other thing is just so...
It's mind-boggling.
It's
really.
Mind-boggling, and it's terrifying.
It is.
It's... Because you think that, the whole point of a court of law is that the prosecutors have a firm case against the defendant, and the defendant is able to defend themselves from it if it's not true. It's just to watch people slip through the cracks like that is just such a wake up call.
Right.
So the jury selection.
Yeah.
There was did you read about I linked it to you, the jurors?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. So for those who haven't researched and everything, there was at least one juror in the case that had in the trial that had a conflict of interest. There were two. I can't remember exactly what it was. One's son was employed by the Manitowoc County Sheriff Department, and the other one had do you remember what the other one was?
She was a clerk at the county courthouse.
That's right. Yeah.
So she was a county employee.
Yeah. And in that Q&A, that was brought up to Dean Strang, and he said that and this was eye-opening to me too, because I didn't realize this at all. But basically, he said that you don't pick a jury, but you remove jurors from the selection, and that you only have six of them, strikes and everything. So basically, they were aware of those conflicts of interest, but they had, and this is probably evidence of how poisonous this case was from a media standpoint, that they had chosen to deselect 6 people from the jury selection, and they had in their opinion 6 people that were more compromising than someone who was familially related to the sheriff's department, that they are positing is framing their client, and someone who is an employee of the county. Yeah. It's tough.
It really is. And jury selection is always that it's more art than it is science, if you will. It's jury selection is a really it's a big problem. And the thing is, like you said, you have 6 strikes, so you could have one person come up and be like, well, I don't want them because they're older and I need younger people. So you strike that person off. But then, later on, you get a juror who has a son who's a cop, And it's like, the one you struck out would have been a much preferable juror to the one that you end up with, but because you can't see what's coming, it's just like, it's just such a delicate thing that's handled so poorly, on an official basis. I mean, it's just, this is how you're supposed to do it. This is how it works. And it's so flawed. It's amazing that that's how we choose to pick jurors and the kind of jurors that can end up on a jury is really shocking. The amount of bias that makes it into juries, and that's really what we're trying to do with jury selection is eliminate biases.
Right.
But you can only do so much. Also, you're dealing with human beings. Like I said, we all have opinions and biases, and so you just can't weed it all out. And it just ruins the objectivity of the justice system. It's that was something that was shocking, but I wasn't necessarily surprised because I think that probably happens every single day across the country.
Right, and that's the real tragedy of this documentary, or that's the main thing to kind of take away from it. So before we can kind of wrap up the topic too, because I mean we've been talking for a while, and we can talk for a long time. But before we get to like the discussion about the outcome and all that stuff, and the filmmakers and all that stuff, let's talk about Brendan's trial, because this like I was so emotionally just ripped apart by it, really. It just hit me so hard. That third episode where they show that he is being, he gives his quote unquote confession, and then the episode after that is just so painful to watch, because it's just he clearly doesn't have the presence of mind to know what he's doing or know the implications of what he's doing or anything. And there's some by the way, I love the way that this series utilized the calls, all kinds of calls throughout the entire history of it and everything. It was just it was because you can hear the honesty or the confusion and just the raw emotion,
the candor. Yeah,
much more than like any kind of talking head could have done after the fact or anything like that. It's just it was very in the moment. There was one moment in particular where Brendan is talking to his mom that was just destroyed me. It was when they were in it was after he was arrested and charged and all that stuff and everything. They're talking about his lawyer, and so Brendan says that he likes his lawyer because he has the same favorite animal. His favorite animal is the same as Brendan's.
Yeah.
And then like the call ends with oh my God, with his mom saying, "I love you, Turkey," and then he says, "Why are you calling me Turkey?" And then she's like, "Because you're my little turkey." And then he just says, "I ain't little," and it's so childlike.
Yeah, it is.
And it's just so it pained me to watch it.
Yeah.
That.
He definitely was a juvenile, on paper, obviously, but in spirit and his actual personality was literally childlike.
Yeah.
And that's it. His story is without question, I think, more tragic than Stephen Avery.
Yeah.
Even though Stephen Avery spent 18 years in jail for something he didn't do, you would think he would garner most of the sympathy, but this poor freaking kid.
Yeah.
I felt so bad for him. And just the lack of awareness for the legal community to not understand how exploitative they were being and how coercive they were being with this poor kid. That's a criminal act in and of itself, I think, to what they did to this kid as far as exploiting his shortcomings and deficiencies. Just
absolutely
beyond tragic. I think it was criminal, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And we can, so the way that the documentary kind of presents that aspect of it, it's a really interesting technique in that they kind of withheld some evidence from us and then revealed it later, particularly his, I think it was his sister or a relative of his
cousin,
yeah, who, basically was the one to tell the police that he was involved in everything. And then that's kind of the impetus of what made them question him and everything. And that's something we didn't get early on. And that made us sympathize with Brendan a lot more and everything. It still doesn't at all make it right what they did in any stretch. but it was interesting the way that they withheld that, and then they kind of revealed it later. And I just got so excited when she said it on the stand. Like, the one person who said, who kind of seemed to know the severity of it and the wrongness of what was going on was the one to say, I made it up, he didn't say that, or he didn't do it, or anything like that. Seeing that was just so raw and heartbreaking.
Absolutely. Yeah. She was, I think she's one of the few people who told the absolute truth.
Yeah.
Which is sad as a 14, 15-year-old girl.
Right.
It takes that kind of naivety to be candid and tell the truth. That's really sad.
And it's something that she has to live with, because it literally ripped the family apart.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, we can kind of wrap up the discussion a little bit here now, but that was one thing that I kind of came away from it was that like throughout the whole time I'm watching it, I've seen on Twitter people making remarks and everything, a lot of like calls to action, and also some like the way that Twitter is kind of, like not snarky or sarcastic or anything, but like kind of like little jokes here and there and stuff like that. And then like I was so affected by this that I didn't tweet this or anything, but I wanted to, just after I was done, be like, oh, I'm done with making a murderer. Now time for me to make some lighthearted joke about something that literally ripped an entire family apart.
Yeah.
That's just the level to which I was invested in this on an emotional level. It was just so gripping.
Yeah. Let's just throwing this out there. Let's all be thankful that the state of Wisconsin does not have the death penalty.
Oh, right.
I mean, Brendan Dassey would not have qualified for it, even if they did have it. But Stephen Avery could be dead right now.
Right.
For that. Because Brendan was just charged with, I don't think they do degree murder. I think they do accessory to murder in Wisconsin. I think that's what he was convicted of, was accessory to murder, which is kind of like second degree murder. You didn't pull the trigger, but you were there. That's kind of how it is, It's
like there's a murder and you're like its handbag or something. I needed to lighten this up.
You really did. I'm surprised.
Right after I just made that joke, or made that comment about
irony.
Yep. Anyway,
about the emotional impact, and then you trivialize it.
Yeah. Anyway,
how dare you?
So, but yeah, accessory to murder. Yeah. It's a very on one hand, it's very fortunate that it doesn't, but you have to extrapolate this entire experience by saying that, like, one thing that I was thinking about in terms of the time aspect of it, like this all was going on in 2005 up until now, and I just started thinking about midway through or later on in the series, I started thinking like right now, as I'm watching this, someone is being arrested, or someone is being framed, or someone is being on trial for something similar like this and getting a similar raw deal out of the entire thing. And here in like 10 years, we'll be talking about it on a podcast because of a documentary.
We probably won't, actually.
Well, probably not.
Yeah.
Wait, did you say will?
I said we probably won't.
Won't, yeah.
Because this is just one trial. Think about the hundreds, if not thousands, that no one knows about. Right.
Well, I'm saying that if it gets a documentary or something.
Because, yeah.
Because we don't talk legal cases on the Obsessive Viewer.
We don't.
Although you did mention you are an objective viewer earlier, and that got my wheels turning.
That's funny.
Anyway, so check out our true crime podcast, The Objective Viewer. Just kidding. So yeah, so to kind of wrap up, how did you react immediately? I think we covered this earlier, but how did you react immediately after seeing this documentary? How was your perspective on it? And then how did your perspective of the case and the way it was presented to you shaped by the reading that you did afterwards? And on both sides, what did you feel about guilty or not guilty for both Brendan and Stephen?
I felt so many things upon the conclusion of the series. I felt really sad at the state of so many different things. I was really frustrated and angry. I really wanted more information. I wanted the full breadth of information on this case. it was just a roller coaster ride of different emotions and reactions to how this all went. At first I was kind of pissed off at the filmmakers. I was like, you should have been more objective and just present the evidence. You don't need to sway it. But I really can't blame them for this. I really can't. After investing 10 years in it, and there's so much to be sympathetic towards in this that I really can't blame them for that. I stated, I think the biggest point of this docuseries that we should all focus on more than anything is that the justice system is screwed up, and objectivity is a very rare thing to come by anymore. I mean, so many of us are just completely subjective on any number of things. And I wish there was a little more objectivity in the world. At least in the first world where we are.
Right.
There's just so many things I could point to, but if not in, how we feel about politics or how we feel about sports or movies, I understand the subjectivity in those things, but justice, there's that classic saying that justice is blind, which is a metaphor for objectivity, but it's just not. It just isn't, and it really should be. And that's the biggest thing I think we should all focus on with this documentary. But of course, the sexier question is, did this guy do it?
Right.
Did he kill this girl? I really don't know. I really don't know. There's so much other evidence that was left out of the documentary that I've learned since. I don't know if we're going to take time to go over that, but
let's just run through it really quickly.
Okay,
there was a few things that I'll just briefly run through.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, because so some of the stuff that was left out of the documentary. First of all, that the story of Stephen as a kid burning the cat was presented to us as, the cat just jumped in the fire or he was playing with him by the fire, and it was just a dumb kid thing to do.
Yeah.
When in actuality, what had happened was that he had covered the cat in gasoline and threw him in the fireplace.
A little more sadistic.
Yeah, and and that was shocking to hear.
Yeah.
And then also that Teresa, the victim, had been to Steve's house before a couple of times, and that he once answered the door wearing just a towel, and he had that she didn't like going to his house, and that she told her boss that he creeped her out, and that Stephen had gone to extreme measures to kind of get her out there the last time.
Yeah.
Like he called and requested her specifically, and then I believe that he gave his sister's name and phone number in order to kind of lure her out there, because they wouldn't accept it if he did that, or if he asked for her and they knew he was asking for her. And then also he'd called her using star 67 to hide his number on her phone like 2 or 3 times before she went to his house.
Yeah.
And so, like, all of that, am I forgetting anything?
Well, there's allegations of molesting his nephews and nieces. There's that, and then there's the theory. Stephen Avery's actual theory is that one of his brothers, Charlie and Errol Avery, I believe are their names.
Right, I don't remember the names, but they were in the documentary.
Were they in there?
Briefly, yeah.
Okay, they were.
One of them was the one that was like, he deserves everything that's coming to him, or everything that he's got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Stephen Avery's theory is that one of them committed the crime and planted everything on him because they were jealous that he was going to get a multi-million-dollar settlement from the county.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's one of his theories. And one of those brothers was convicted of sexual assault.
Really?
On women. He was a predatory person, basically.
Jeez.
So that's pretty bad evidence. It kind of paints the Avery family in a darker light.
Right.
So there's those two things. Yeah, I mean, and all that stuff I think is important to know when you're looking at this. So I really don't know. I think maybe he did do it.
Really?
I think maybe he did, but I'm not 100% convinced.
Yeah.
And if I had been a juror on that trial, I would have voted for a mistrial.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I mean, I think the trial should have been conducted better, and since it wasn't, they should have done a whole new trial. There should have been. that was the biggest mess. I think, ironically, maybe the jury came to the correct conclusion that he is guilty of this crime, but the means by how they got there was ridiculously sloppy and unprofessional,
right?
And not a properly conducted event.
Right. In that evidence that was left out of the documentary, a lot of it is just more character-based stuff. So like it's like it was presented as, oh, they left out a lot. This is clearly like he's guilty and everything. I didn't come away from it like that. I felt that he's a weird guy. It made him less sympathetic, but I don't think it didn't prove to me beyond a reasonable doubt that he did it or anything. However, there was one piece of evidence also that they had DNA of his at that was underneath the hood.
Yes, it was on the hood latch.
Yeah,
of Teresa Halbach's car.
Right, and basically that is not possible.
Yeah, it was not. It wasn't.
It's not plantable.
Yeah, it wasn't blood DNA. It was like sweat.
Right,
or something like that. Yeah.
Which it wasn't included in the documentary, but
right. That's pretty bad too.
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah. That's the one that I would latch onto and think, well, maybe he did. I'm not convinced that he did.
Yeah,
but it's possible.
Yeah, I don't think Stephen Avery is necessarily a good person based on some of the stories about him and all that stuff.
The Stephen Avery in the show is a good person, but the what comes to light afterwards, he's not as.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
I think he's, like you said, he was sympathetic in the series, but I don't think he's necessarily evil, though. I think he's just done some bad stuff. Take that as you will. You might have a different opinion.
Right.
But on the other hand, Brendan Dassey, I think that kid is almost entirely 100% a victim.
Wrong absolutely.
Place at the wrong time, born into the wrong family. I feel really bad for that kid.
It's the tragedy of the documentary, really. Yeah, Brendan.
I think it's possible that he may have witnessed something. Maybe he did see Teresa Halbach by their property taking pictures of the car. Maybe he did see his uncle burning body parts in a fire. But I do not believe for 1 second that he raped Teresa Halbach.
Right.
I don't believe that he stabbed her. I don't believe that he stood by and watched his uncle kill her. I do not believe that. I don't think this kid. I think the most he's guilty of is perjury. And he has no idea what perjury even is.
Right.
So is he really guilty of it if he has no intent to commit perjury?
Right.
I mean, that is an absolute mess. That kid should be at home with his parents right now.
The one of the, if not the most infuriating thing about this entire 10-episode documentary series is that the jury in his trial did not see the part of the video of him saying that they got in his head.
Yes.
Like that is just like the most just infuriating part of it.
It really is.
And it's the biggest, most tragic part of it, really.
There's another thing I wanted to bring up just super quick.
Sure.
They show a evidence video where the police department comes into the crime scene afterwards and films part of their search. And there's a part where they go into Stephen Avery's home, his trailer, and they're like in his bedroom and they see his closet and there's some shoes in there. And one of the police officers says, I'm paraphrasing, I can't remember exactly what she says, but she says something along the lines of, hey, maybe we should grab some of those shoes in case we've got some unsolved burglaries in the area.
Yeah.
I mean, how is that not a blatant admission of corruption?
Right.
And just planting evidence? That is egregious. That was basically unaddressed.
Absolutely.
That was awful.
Yep. Yeah. Ugh.
Anyways, we got off track like we tend to do. I don't know if he did it or not. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if he did. I'm inclined to think that he didn't, but it is a little bit of the bias from the documentary guiding me into that. If he did do it, there's no way that he did it the way that they said that he did it.
Yeah.
And there's no way that the evidence that they found was, I don't think that there's any way that the evidence that they found wasn't tampered with in some way. Or everything. The way that it was presented there is just
absolutely,
just such a mess. So that's on Netflix. Making a Murderer. I mean, coming away from this, I would really love to see, Netflix do more things like this, or fund more things like this, or buy more things like this, documentaries like this, and true crime documentaries particularly.
I mean, I love Netflix so much for their commitment to documentaries. Last year I watched 89 or something like that.
Right.
I think 75 of them were on Netflix.
Jeez, that's amazing.
They're just so committed to quality. That's one of their first like production things they launched was Netflix documentaries. They actually like financed documentaries, people to go shoot documentaries. That's one of the first things they did, I think, in the pursuit of original content.
That's right.
And I'm just so glad that they're taking stuff like this because I love it, and I think it's great. Not only great entertainment, but great thought provoking information to digest and
conversation starting.
Stuff like that.
Yeah. All right. So, how would you feel about us clearing the air, as it were, and talking about some potpourri?
Making the air smell nice.
Yes,
with some potpourri.
Because do ever we need it.
It's been a while.
Farting this whole time. It really has been a while.
It's been like 3-4 weeks, maybe.
It has, and I have 4 things I want to bring up.
Okay.
And in saying that, I also want to preface that by saying, next week we're doing extended potpourri. Which, by the way, thank you everyone for listening to the Obsessive Viewer and everything like that. And I apologize that 2 weeks ago we were supposed to have an extended potpourri episode out, but it just didn't work out that way, so we had a week off. So I apologize for that. But
I was sick as well.
Right.
So, yeah.
So we've built up a lot of potpourri. For first-time listeners of the podcast, potpourri is the section of the podcast where we talk about anything that we want to in regards to movies and television. That's stuff we've watched, stuff we're looking forward to, news items, anything like that. So for potpourri, I mentioned that I had 4 things, and I mean, I have a feeling next week is going to be just a massive episode.
Yeah.
Much like this one and last week's episode. But anyway, so I have 2 things, or I have 4 things, but I'm going to talk about 2 and then you have 1.
I have 1, yeah.
So we'll sandwich that in between. So the 2 that I have, first of all, kind of interesting in that I intentionally did this because I wanted to have something related to the main topic, basically, in order to talk about. The first one is the Jinx. Are you familiar with this, Tiny? Have you watched any of it?
I am not. I don't know anything about it. And I've not
Very
watched any
interesting.
of it. Yeah.
Okay. So the Jinx is on HBO. It's a 6-part miniseries or 6-part documentary series. I think it was early around this time last year that it was airing, or maybe a few months before that. It's basically about Robert Durst. Are you familiar with that guy?
I am not.
Okay, so
the lead singer, Limp Bizkit?
No, that's no. Anyway, so Robert Durst is the eldest son of a real estate tycoon in New York who owns several skyscrapers and stuff.
Okay.
So he is in the 80s. His wife disappeared. Robert Durst's wife disappeared, and it was heavily believed that he was involved with the disappearance and things like that. There's a lot more to the story, but I'll keep you in the dark for it. Please watch it. You will freaking get a lot out of this.
Okay.
So the whole documentary is that there's just a few instances where death has occurred to people near him.
Wow.
Yeah, and so this filmmaker, I can't remember his name, and he's done a lot of stuff, or a fair amount of stuff, but he made a movie about Robert Durst called All Good Things. You may have seen it on Netflix.
Okay.
The cover is oh my god,
Ryan Gosling?
Ryan Gosling.
Yeah.
And Kirsten Dunst.
Okay.
So like that movie is based on the Robert Durst story.
Wow. Okay.
And so basically what happened was that movie came out in I think 2010, and then Robert Durst saw it and called the filmmaker and was like, "Hey, I would like to have a one-on-one interview with you in order to get my side of the story out there."
Wow.
Yeah, and if you don't know anything about the story, go and watch it. Like, that should be what you do, like, as soon as you possibly can.
Okay.
So basically, the series is a really well constructed documentary where they go through all of the stories and everything like that. They have a really interesting use of reenactments that are really well handled, but I guess they got some flack because it's a little tasteless to show reenactments of dead bodies. But it didn't bother me or anything. But the main thing about it is that this documentary series has a few really incredible jaw-dropping moments that it blew my mind.
Wow.
It was insane what they got on film for this. And I won't say what it was or anything like that, but just watch. It's amazing. It's on HBO and HBO Go and all that.
Nice.
But also the way that Durst is presented, he's a very eccentric guy. He's very strange. And I was listening to a podcast review of it a while ago. Like it was funny because I remember hearing about this last year when it was like more culturally relevant and talked about on podcasts. And I remember one podcast in particular referring to it as referring to seeing Robert Durst talk as, what if extraterrestrials were real and they were talking to us? Like it's that level of disconnect of it's a surreal thing. When watching it, I felt like it was like watching an alien try to imitate a human. And it's chilling. It's absolutely chilling and unnerving. Like he has this weird tick and this very weird like tell where he blinks like aggressively after he says something that is pretty much anything he says.
Wow.
And and where it all leads is so. Watch it and we'll talk about it. I'm dying to talk to you about it.
I'm
honestly.
very intrigued.
Yeah, it's 6 episodes. I came home, I think it was Monday from work, and I watched all 6 episodes.
Wow.
Yeah, and like they're all like about 50 between like there's one episode that's like 35 or 39 minutes, but the rest are between 39 and 50 minutes for each episode.
Okay.
And I mean, it was riveting. It was absolutely riveting.
Nice.
And much like Making a Murderer, don't Google it if you're not aware of it, because it'll be very interesting to talk to you about it.
Nice.
That's the Jinx. It's on HBO and HBO Go and HBO Now and all that.
Okay.
And then my second potpourri for this section is The Thin Blue Line, which I actually just watched tonight. It's from 1988. It's Errol Morris's documentary about it's an acclaimed documentary about a crime, a police officer that was murdered in what year was it? 1976, I believe. Okay. And in Texas. And it's I have to admit, it was really hard to I didn't think it was very accessible, really.
Okay.
It was just it's a traditional documentary, also similar to the Jinx. It has reenactments throughout it.
Mm-hmm.
And what was really jarring and just not conducive to a good experience watching it was that all the talking heads, like there's no like title cards to identify who they are.
Oh.
It's not presented in a way that's maybe I'm spoiled by like the Jinx and Making a Murderer.
Right.
Because it's not constructed in a way that is conducive to a narrative format. So it's like, you use it from the opening, and I don't know if this is a signature of Errol Morris or not. I haven't seen any of his other stuff, but from the beginning, it's just like you see talking heads, and then you see it's like they're talking to the subjects of it, not identifying who they are or anything like that. And then it's like 15 minutes into it, I had no context for who the suspects were. It was a very dry experience.
Huh.
And then like they introduce the people, but without really introducing them. It's kind of an in progress thing. It's almost like an in progress experience of just kind of stumbling onto these interviews with these people.
Huh.
And then it just shows a reenactment of the crime. And it's shot in a way that I just did not like. It was basically the crime was that a police officer on a traffic stop came up to a car, and then the driver of the car shot him 4 times, and then he fell to the ground. The way it's a very, it's a very 80s way to shoot it. And by that I mean that he comes up to, like, they show him coming up to the car, and then as soon as he reaches the point where the gun is fired off, it shows a close up of the gun, and it's firing 4 times, and it immediately put me at a disadvantage and made me unable to connect to it, and it was a pretty, and I have notes for it, and there's like, I identify the 2 central subjects of it as Guy in White and Guy in Orange, because I didn't know their names. And it was really frustrating. And I believe it's pretty well regarded and highly acclaimed. I didn't get it. In my final thought on it is that it had a very weird, like, talking head style. It was like, it was as if they were. It wasn't like they were answering questions. Like, it wasn't like, and you don't see anyone interviewing them or anything. So the talking head style is just basically them. It's like all the people that are talking, it's like they're telling a story, and they don't really, it's not smooth enough.
Okay.
And the editing is very strange. Like, there's one where I think one of the lawyers is talking, and she's saying something, and then it cuts away to a reenactment with her still talking over it, and then it cuts back to her, and like, the audio is fairly seamless, I think. But the video is like clearly the video of her talking in the second after the reenactment is a completely different take, or a completely different thing, because she's wearing glasses when in the first one she isn't. And then there's even like I think it's her introduction to the documentary when she's talking. It's like it was cut to it, or it's like in editing, it's like they cut off maybe 30 seconds or maybe like 10 or 20 seconds of it, because it's like it cuts to her. This is the first time we're seeing her, and she's like in mid sentence, and it was just really off putting.
It sounds very disjointed.
Yeah, it was very disjointed, very off putting, and I don't know. It didn't hook me, and it didn't give me much in terms of a narrative or anything to really follow. I was just very, very off put by it, and very disappointed, because it had a lot of weight behind it, I think.
It's funny you bring it up, because I actually watched it at some point, and it's funny, I don't remember it.
Really?
I really don't remember it, but I looked it up when you mentioned it earlier, and I gave it 3 stars. At some point, so I watched it, but I have no memory of it.
Wow.
So it must have not been very good.
Yeah, I gave it 2 stars, and I gave it 2 stars, and it's funny because I had an idea of what it was. I thought that I knew what it was, but I think that in my head I had it confused with, I want to say Clint Eastwood is in this movie, but I had it confused with the movie In the Line of Fire.
Okay.
I think that's the name of it, but I don't know. Anyway, it didn't do anything for me. If you've seen the Thin Blue Line and I'm missing something entirely, or if this is a signature of Errol Morris' style, I might check out some of his other stuff, just to get a taste of it. But Thin Blue Line didn't do anything for me.
Okay.
Yeah. So what do you have for Potpourri, Tiny?
Well, it's more documentary. That's all we've been talking about this episode.
Right.
And it's something I bring up all the time, but I watched a documentary that came out, in the past couple months, I think. It's called Best of Enemies.
Nice.
It's a documentary that follows, these, political debates that took place during the party conventions during the 1968 presidential election. The Democratic National Convention in 1968 took place in Chicago, which it's a very famous convention, because it's famous for the protests that took place during it. It's a very, very famous convention. But throughout those 2 conventions, the Republican one, I forget where that one was. I want to say Florida. They had these debates between 2 political figures, political pundits. They're very famous if you follow political philosophy. On the more conservative Republican side was William F. Buckley Jr., who's a very prominent television personality, political philosopher, a pundit, just very famous on the right, if you will. And then on the other side, you have another icon of politics, Gore Vidal, who is a very famous left-leaning liberal. There's a lot of he's kind of mysterious. Some people think he was a gay man. Some people think he wasn't. It's kind of mysterious. Maybe he was bisexual. They're not really sure. But he was a very prominent social rights proponent. Well before that was before that was a popular thing. He was an author who wrote some books that involved homosexuality, transgender issues. He wrote a book where a transgender woman rapes a man. And this was in the 60s. So that was he was a very controversial but very far ahead of his time pundit on social issues. So these guys are two opposite sides of the political spectrum. But it's kind of ironic. They had very similar backgrounds. They're both part of very elite families, like one of those deep American families that goes back centuries, that kind of had carved out some kind of corner of the East Coast and was very famous and very powerful in their respective communities, just kind of like the Kennedys. They both came from families kind of like the Kennedys, the Buckleys and the Vidals.
Right.
And so they both kind of have this philosophy that the elite, members of the elite, are born to lead men. You know, that's kind of a famous philosophy, is that, you know, you're born into these families with all this privilege, and you're supposed to use that to become a leader. That's kind of how these two people thought. And, you know, William Buckley kind of thought you use your resources to become a man of power, and then you use that power to steer law and to steer philosophy and all that stuff in the right direction. Whereas Gore Vidal believed that you use your power to kind of give back to the populace, the less elite people.
Okay.
And it's kind of, at the time, that wasn't really something that was widely expressed, but now we see that as conservatism and liberalism, which are two things that everyone, if you know anything about politics, Republicans are conservative and Democrats are liberal, and that these two men during these debates kind of cemented that conflict. That was the beginning of that conflict of, you know, small government versus big government, and helping out your fellow man versus steering law in the right direction so they can help themselves. It's kind of, you know, it's stuff that you hear every single day on the news now. But back then it was a revolutionary thing that no one had really established yet. So this kind of conflict we're in, these two men kind of started it with these debates in the 1968. They debated each other 10 times, I believe. Maybe it was 12. I don't recall. But I think it was 8 times, because each convention, I think, was 4 days. Okay. And they would have a debate on ABC News after the day's events. And so they did the Democratic one and the Republican one. So I think it was 8 times. And it culminates into an area where they, after the last debate, the two men never spoke again. Wow. And they absolutely despised one another. Wow. They hated each other on a personal level, on a philosophical level. And the thing is, they've both since passed away, but they were both just absolutely brilliant intellectual men who understood their arguments so well and knew how to debate very well. Gore Vidal was more oratory based, whereas William Buckley was more debate heavy.
Like subject.
He knew how to attack.
Gotcha.
He knew how to dismantle arguments very well. He knew how to use ad hominem attacks and different kinds of tactics to bring someone down. They showed some of the debates, obviously, in this documentary. It was really interesting to see how the two styles really got under the skin of their opposing their opponent.
Right.
And there's something that happens in one of the debates that kind of haunted William F. Buckley for the rest of his life. I don't want to spoil anything, but
right.
The documentary was just so amazing. It was so cool. I never realized how important these debates were, and I knew who William F. Buckley and Gore Vidal both were. Right. I've read some of Buckley's stuff. He's hilarious. He actually reminds me a lot of our friend Greg Lenz.
Oh, really?
He's a lot like that, except a little more, I don't know, proper, I guess. No offense, Greg. But it was just so fascinating to watch these two posh upper class guys, elitists, duke it out on national television. And the documentary is fantastic. They really dove into this, and this is a philosophical debate that's raging in the fires of hell right now. It's just every time you look about anything about politics, it's just there's so much fervor and vitriol, and you could argue that the source of it is these 8 debates between these two men. It's just a really fascinating thing that I don't think a lot of people know much about. I knew almost nothing about it. So I was just really blown away by how monumental this was. And the documentary covers it great. One of my idols is actually interviewed in it, Christopher Hitchens.
Oh, nice.
Who passed away a few years ago. He was hearing him talk about it, I was like, he was talking about William F. Buckley like he's the greatest debater of all time.
Jeez.
And I was under the impression that Christopher Hitchens was the greatest debater of all time. So
wow.
It's just really it's such a unique event that so many people have never even heard of. I'm really glad someone made a documentary about it so I can understand the importance of it. It's made me very intrigued it's inspired me to go out and read some of the philosophy of some of these two men. I mean, I don't want to get political, but personally, I kind of fall in the middle of the two of them. I'm kind of a libertarian kind of guy, so I don't necessarily like go to either side. I don't necessarily say like, oh, William F. Buckley is so much better than Gore Vidal or whatever.
Right.
I don't really care, but
yeah.
I think they're both incredibly intriguing and compelling people who are far more intelligent than I am. So it's really inspired me to go search out some of their writing and some of their speeches and stuff like that. It's really awesome, and it's on Netflix. It's only like 90 minutes. It's a pretty quick documentary. It's really great.
Very cool.
Best of Enemies.
I saw it on Netflix. I think it was just recently added, so I saw it pop up, and I immediately thought of you because I knew that you would be interested in it. So, that's cool. Would you say that they're master debaters?
Dear God.
So anyway,
how old are you?
No comment. So for to kind of round out Potpourri here, I made a pledge, or I was challenged many moons ago.
Yeah.
Back in OV149, which was our food documentary episode. Tiny chose at random from a bag, and he chose a number from a piece of paper that basically told me that I needed to watch a certain number on in that case it was my Hulu queue, which was a documentary called Absinthe. So I watched it like a month ago, and I just haven't had a chance to talk about it on the podcast because we haven't done a traditional potpourri segment at all since then. So Absinthe is a documentary about and again, it's funny that it's another documentary for this episode.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's a documentary about the drink absinthe and kind of about the history of it and all that. And honestly, I wish I would have talked about it earlier because it's kind of gone from my mind. It's kind of forgettable. There's a lot of emphasis put on the history of it, and there's a lot of people that talk about how. Okay, this was my main takeaway from it. Watching a documentary about something that people love is really interesting. But watching a documentary about something that people love, that is something that you taste, that I have never tasted and I don't think I can really get access to taste here.
Right.
Isn't really that interesting. It was kind of dry. It's, no pun intended. And some of it was a little, not snobby, but just kind of kind of just it wasn't really for me. They were talking about how probably the most interesting thing about it, honestly, is that the style in which they drink absinthe. I always just assume you get a bottle and pour it in a glass and drink it, and you're gonna have hallucinations. That was my perspective of absinthe going into it. It's not like that at all. And actually, I'm doing a disservice to the actual documentary, and I'm kind of all over the place, but there's a moment in the documentary that talks about that, how it was banned following a I can't remember the exact specifics, but someone had, I think a guy had murdered his family or something. And it, like, the media basically assumed or they said one thing and then extrapolated it to where it was like, oh, absinthe made him murder his family, so we're going to ban it.
Okay.
And it was just basically a smear campaign against absinthe, and it's not like that at all.
Okay.
It's just a drink. But, yeah, so that was one part of the documentary that I was somewhat interested in. But another part that is the style, the way in which they drink it. Basically, they
pour it over sugar cubes.
Yeah,
that's what I thought.
And I thought that was just interesting. And
that's a very like Eastern European, Slavic kind of thing to do that. Yeah, so I think that's kind of where absinthe hails from, or is most popular over there. So that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, and it was a documentary about a drink that I've never drank and probably never will. So I mean, if you're into that, check it out. Should still be on Hulu.
So absinthe doesn't actually have hallucinogenic properties?
I don't believe so, no.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Not to the effect that it's been colloquially believed or whatever.
Good to know.
Yeah. And so finally, my last bit of potpourri was on episode 142, which was our Creed review. We picked another thing for me to review, and it happened to be Pontypool. It was on my Netflix queue, and Pontypool was a much more enjoyable experience for me from other than absinthe. Was basically it was a it's a zombie movie, but it's contained. It's this radio DJ doing a morning radio show is in his studio with his there was two people. There's one is his producer and the other is I think a technician or something.
Okay.
Or like an intern, or maybe not an intern, but kind of a fact checker or something like that. So Pontypool is a zombie movie in which pretty much the entire thing is localized to this studio.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I really it spoke to me because I kind of love the idea of, or in my head I've romanticized the idea of the late night radio DJ. And this is just me, like, as a kid I was a night owl and I would listen to the radio or I would go with my at some point or another, my family was down to like one car. We had one car, and my mom had to pick up my dad at work, or vice versa, and they worked nights, or worked. They got off work late at night, so I would go with them to pick up the parent, and I would hear just this is back in the days of radio, and like people were talking on the radio at night, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of the idea of someone sitting in a room talking into a microphone to just the ether and then taking calls and stuff was just something that I developed I romanticized in my head a bit in my childhood, and that kind of it's funny that now I do a podcast.
It's an unfortunately lost art for the most part.
It is, I think, yeah.
From a live perspective anyways.
Right.
Yeah.
But anyway, so in that kind of aspect of the movie really spoke to my podcaster heart as well. So it's interesting. The I don't have the name of the actor. I apologize, but the actor who is the DJ, if anything else, his radio voice in the show, in the movie, is like incredible. Like, he has such a great presence in the movie, and it made it really easy to just dive into it and everything. And so the entire movie's, the first 2/3 are really, really good. And as you get more information about what's going on, because it's basically he's finding out through some affiliates and stuff like that about this zombie outbreak that's happening outside of his walls. And as all the information comes out, it was really interesting. It was something I was really along for the ride on. And there's a few nice moments of kind of levity and kind of dark humor too, because there's like there's a correspondent who's like the morning traffic guy, who it's like he's in a helicopter and all that. So that's an interesting thing, but it's a low budget thing, so you don't see him. It's just all over the air in the station. But there's just little bits and pieces that come to light about him, and it's just like there's like off the cuff remarks saying something about him, and it just kind of just completely shatters the idea of what this radio station is and what not to that degree, but to what he's doing really. And it's just a nice bit of humor in it.
Okay.
And it's just I don't know, I can't. Oh, the actual zombies in it. I won't give away much about them, but I will say that they're somewhat unlike any other zombies I've seen, while also reminding me heavily of like one of my more more favorite Doctor Who episodes, actually. Okay. I won't say which one, but it's an inventive spin on the zombie genre. Yeah, and I thought that it was just a really killer concept, and yeah, I thought that it was it didn't really end in a satisfying way for me, but I thought that the ride to that ending was more than enough to make up for any shortcomings I had with the ending.
Nice.
Yep, and that's Pontypool, and it is on the Netflixes.
Sweet.
Yes. So my God, we're gonna have a long episode this week.
Another one, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so yeah, so that's it. But Tiny, before we go, for the first time in 2016, do you want to pick a thing for me to do?
Let's do it.
Sweet.
All right.
Amazon numbers 41 to 50.
Yep.
So
that's the first Amazon pick, I think.
It is, and I'm really excited. So what's number?
I'm gonna go with 44.
44.
Since we're currently being ruled by our 44th president. That's just random.
That was very random.
I didn't mean that to sound so disdainful.
Right. All right. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and count this. So number 44 on my Amazon Prime instant queue is a documentary.
Nice.
It's called Misery Loves Comedy.
Okay.
It's directed by Kevin Pollak, and basically here's the plot description from Amazon Prime. Are all comedians miserable? Kevin Pollak sits down with some of the most successful comics working today, including Tom Hanks, Jimmy Fallon, Amy Schumer, and Judd Apatow, to learn about what drives comedians to be funny. I am crazy excited for this, actually.
Nice.
Yeah.
I like Kevin Pollak.
Me too. All right. So then that'll be on we'll open next week's episode with that.
Okay.
Which will be extended potpourri, which we have I at least have tons of stuff that, we're going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And then my cat is eating the paper. So anyway, that does it for us. Thanks for listening. And, once again, if you guys could, if you haven't already, please go on iTunes and rate and review us. Just to help support us and all that. And then also, have a good day.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Thank you for listening to The Obsessive Viewer, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. You can find more of our episodes at ovpodcast.com, and you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or your preferred podcast app. The Obsessive Viewer's theme song is An Eclipse of Events and is provided by Loudlike from their EP Mistakes We Must Make. You can find that and more great music from them on iTunes and like their Facebook page at facebook.com/loudlikemusic. Any and all feedback on the podcast is encouraged. You can email the hosts individually at Matt, Tiny, or Mike at obsessiveviewer.com, or send an email to the podcast in general at podcast@obsessiveviewer.com. Check out the Obsessive Viewer blog at obsessiveviewer.com, where we post movie and TV reviews and the occasional editorial about the business of entertainment. You can also like us on Facebook at facebook.com/theobsessiveviewer and follow us on Twitter at obsessiveviewer, at obsessivetiny, and at IamMikeWhite. If you want more obsessive content in your life, check out our sister site, obsessivebooknerd.com, for book reviews, author spotlights, and a general celebration of reading. Finally, if you're philosophically curious, check out Tiny's side project podcast, The Secular Perspective, which explores the concepts of faith, religion, and existence from the perspective of secular hosts. You can find that at thesecularperspective.com and subscribe to the podcast on the podcatcher of your choice. Again, thank you so much for listening. We love you. Be excellent to each other.